Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video is going to be on my maturation as an individual. And the reason I want to talk about this is because just think that it's going to give better context to why I think some of the things that I think, and it'll be a way for me to just generally go over a wider variety of ideas than I normally cover in a video that will provide better context for why I think the things that I think. And so, with that said, I would just want to start from first what it meant for me to come into the world in the context that I was a part of in my early childhood. So I was raised by my grandmother. I was not raised by my mother nor my father. I don't really know who my biological father is, and my mother had me when she was 17 years old, and so she couldn't take care of me. And in fact, she lived with myself, my sister, and my grandmother. She had my sister whenever she was 16, and so she had me when she was 17. And so we're she had me when she got pregnant with me when she was 17 years old. She had me when she was 18 years old. She had my sister when she was 15 years old. So there's about 2 years between myself and my sister, in between our birthdays. The most my sister is ever older than me is 2.5 years old in a given, yeah, in a given year, and that shrinks to 1 year older after a birthday and then leaps back after another birth. Anyways, so yeah, so hopefully I'm getting chronologically those things right, but so suffice to say that my mother could not take care of me. And so she lived with us when I was younger, and for a long time I thought she was my sister. It wasn't until she moved out, when I think I was about 2 or 3 years old, that I found out my mother was actually my mom and not my sister, which was an interesting thing to find out. So I was always a precocious kid and everything like that. I started talking apparently at 6 months. I started forming words and trying to have conversations at 6 months. I apparently fully articulate myself and everything like that by the time I was a year old. I was walking at 9. I was fully walking on my own at 9 months and things like that. So I was I wasn't like super exceptional per se, but it was clear to my grandmother that I moved at a faster clip than other people, and I was always moving and trying and doing things whenever I was a kid, and I was interested in talking to adults. I'd always been interested in talking to adults. I mean, I remember being 2 years old and talking to adults and wanting to have conversations with adults. I was one of those kids that was very much so anxious to grow up. I didn't actually like being a kid. So that's one of the things that I remembered as a child. To me, being a child was almost a very servile thing. I mean, I liked playing, but I didn't like the fact that, I had to really work to have my voice heard, and or express this or that, or to be taken seriously. So I remember even as a really little kid, I was very annoyed when people didn't take my ideas seriously, especially adults, because I took them seriously. So I was kind of intense, but I was also a very rambunctious, energetic kid as well. Though I was introverted, which always shocked people whenever they actually saw me in different settings. So that's who I am as a kid, and so that's some context and everything like that. I did live in a predominantly black neighborhood, and then my grandmother and my grandfather moved to a suburban neighborhood when I was about 6 years old, and so 5 or 6, maybe in as early as 4. I mean, to be frank, I'm not gonna say that I'm gonna get these dates correct because I'm not somebody who's very self-reflective, so I don't do this biographical stuff very often. It's always honestly something I've only been doing very recently since meeting my girlfriend, and people want to know things about you before they uh, decide to be in a relationship with you and things like that. And people do talk about themselves in relationships and stuff like that. That's part of intimacy and everything like that. At least for me, I hardly ever talk about myself. And so if I talk about myself, it's going to be with somebody I know very well, that I care about or I appreciate or I love. Or it's going to be because it's fitting to some context, like it's necessary. But only under those circumstances or absolute seeming necessity do I do it. So with that said, yeah, I may not get things 100% exact, but somewhere around, I think it's four. So I think I'll say four because um, around. So one thing that's true about my family is that my grandmother worked for a computer software company, Compact, and from the 80s to the 90s. Uh, and so she wound up injuring herself at work and settled a lawsuit with Compact over her injuries, and I think got awarded everything from like, I think it was $100,000. I think that's what this suit. It was at least 60,000, but I'm pretty sure it was $100,000. And so, and this is in the early '90s, and so that's a lot of money. So that's a lot of money. And my grandfather, he repaired medical equipment, so he worked in radiology and different, but repairing equipment. So he wasn't like he was a medical tech, and so that's what he did. And so he got paid relatively well to do that. I think he was. I'm not really sure what he was making, but I know with my early childhood, my family, we would go on vacations all the damn time. I mean, I got to go to Astroworld, I don't know how many times as a little kid. I had a lot of privileges. I mean, I got to leave the country and travel around travel around the United States and things like that and experience different cultures and different people at a very early age. So I had like a pretty multi demographic upbringing where I met people in many different walks of life from high socioeconomic standing to low socioeconomic standing. Though I wasn't aware of those things necessarily whenever I was younger, I just knew that I was meeting different people all the time in different situations, very drastically different, one to the next. Something to those effects, and so. But I really, being an open kid, I really liked that. So, I mean, I really liked talking to um, random people as a kid, and them telling me something I didn't know before. It was the fact that people could satisfy a type of interest in curiosity and adventure that I had as a little kid that I liked. So I really enjoyed traveling and things like that. And so this is true in the world until I'm about 6 years old, and then at five I have to go to school. So to give you some context on my grandmother is a freaking Nazi. My grandmother has some inclination that I can read and things like that because on various occasions I read signs and like billboard signs in the car, and I also there's like a few instances where it was clear to people that I could read sentences when I was about 2, 3, and 4. I obviously like improved, but when I'm 4 years old, My sister's about to start. My sister's going to school or about to start. I'm not quite in school. Well, I'm about to go to preschool. I'm about to go to pre-K, and so my grandmother wants us to be academically prepared to be competitive. So that's what she wants, and so she purchases. I don't know, well, from where the You Can Read series, which is like an upper middle class version of Hooked on Phonics. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that, but You Can Read's not Hooked on Phonics. It's literally a um, grammar and literature series, so it's boring. That's what the hell it is. And so I had to sit there as a kid and watch these videos and work through these stupid workbooks, from the ages of 4. And I don't know why my grandmother thought it was a brilliant idea, but she would have me write current events. So I'd have to read something in the newspaper from this that was currently going on, so something contemporary, and then write a summary, paragraph, 1 to 2 paragraph summary on what I read. And she was very particular about the quality of what I wrote and things like that. I remember having several of my drafts rejected as a kid and being very frustrated about that too, because I didn't want to sit down and write the damn thing anyways. I can tell you this, that I started You Can Read whenever I was 4. By the time I was 6 years old, I was on the 5th grade cassette, because they were in little cassette tape modules that range from kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. They went all the way up to 8th grade. God. My sister got to I don't know which one my sister got to. Because my sister didn't study it as long as I did. So, but Joshua could read by the time he went to, he went to school, because he was inflicted. He was inflicted with reading. And that's what I remember thinking, that I was inflicted with education. I never liked it. Never actually liked any of the stuff that happened. I felt like it happened to me. I remember when people found out I could read, and I could read very well in kindergarten, they were so impressed. I thought, what the hell is wrong with you people? I don't care. I didn't care. So I wasn't a kid at that age. Like, I did not care whatsoever. I wanted to be very, 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 very far away from academia and education and everything like that. Probably because I thought it was dumb, and everything that people would ask me to do, I could do it anyways. And I would always get perfect scores on the reading portion of the statewide testing and things like that. And I'm telling you, when I say I didn't study or anything like that, I didn't study. And there's gonna be some more context to why that wasn't the case. And so I didn't. I didn't like school, so I just put it like that. I didn't like school because, as far as I was concerned, I've been doing school for too long. Even before I went to school, I was learning things that weren't very interesting to me. That's the way I'd put it. But yeah, and so that's where a lot of my precocity comes from my grandmother being so goddamn militant. I do have ability, and I've known, and my grandmother's known I've had ability, and I've known, well, I'm not gonna say I knew. I mean, people talked about it and stuff like that, but when I tell you I was disinterested, I was extremely disinterested. I didn't care, man. I was just a kid. Like, I really did not care. What's normative to me is what's normative to me. I'll explain it like that. That's what my attitude was, and people trying to make more out of me, it really bothered me. So it really bothered me. If anybody ever tried to make something more out of me, or admonish me for not living up to some potential or something like that, that annoyed the shit out of me. Because I didn't want to be different. Whenever I was a kid, I didn't really want to be different. And I didn't want people to tell me what to do either. So those are two those are two strong motivators. And so that was that. Now, in terms of the education that I did find interesting, I would watch a lot of PBS and nature specials on PBS and National Geographic. I really was into ecology and biology. And whenever I was younger, I thought I was going to be a biologist. Thought I was going to be a veterinarian or a biologist, one of the two. Thought I was going to work with animals or be a biologist, but a field biologist like Jane Goodall. So I was going to be an ontologist, and I knew who Jane Goodall was. So I thought all of that stuff was cool, and so that was, of course, until I met other kids. So yeah. Anyways, so that's who I was and everything like that. And then there's another side of it too. My grandmother So just to give some context on who my grandmother is, from another vantage point, my grandmother grew up during the civil rights movement. So my grandmother lived during Jim Crow times. She was a young girl and an early teenager during Jim Crow times. When schools, she was a part of the first the integrated schools in her area. My grandmother actually went to segregated elementary schools, and I believe my grandmother was going to a segregated high school until her junior and senior year of high school, where she finally went to an integrated high school. But so my grandmother's seen a completely different world than I've seen or anything like that. Which is why my grandmother is much more of a black nationalist than, anybody you'd probably meet, because my grandmother is a very interesting woman. Yeah, she left home whenever she was 18 years old and went and lived in New York with her father because her parents split up whenever she was younger and everything like that. And it's in New York that she found out about the Black Panther Party. She went and saw Malcolm X and various things like that. So my grandmother was, a lot more militant than um, people would know, especially when she was like, I believe my grandmother started some mid-20s. Grandmother's and my grandmother's about to be 67. So, I believe my grandmother was still in her late 30s whenever she was raising me and my sister and myself, and so she was in her late 30s, about to start hitting her 40s. So she was still pretty militant, and so she educated us on Black history in America. And I don't know if I want to necessarily say Black history. So I am of Nigerian and Sierra Leonean descent. That's where my African heritage comes from, though the rest of it's European, which my grandmother was very clear in making it known to me why that was the case. Maybe not. So we didn't have 23andMe or anything like that back then, but my grandmother was very keen on schooling us on the education of African American history and within America. So I knew about slavery. I knew about Jim Crow. She made it very clear that I ought to know about Jim Crow South. I knew about the Black Panthers. I knew about Stokely Carmichael. I knew about Huey P. Newton. I knew about the assassination of Huey P. Newton. The exile of Stokely Carmichael. Um, Knew about the assassination of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. I knew about their various philosophical and political ideas and attitudes and things like that. My grandmother was always clear in expressing that she preferred Malcolm X to Martin Luther King. She says she had respect for both of them, but she preferred Malcolm X over Martin Luther King by any means necessary. That was the adage my grandmother said that she lived by. Um, yeah, so I had a very interesting childhood from the standpoint that my grandmother is like this, mind you, my grandmother is like this, but I'm living in a suburb, an upper middle class suburb where there's nothing but white and Asian people around me, like nothing. So I lived around a bunch of black people whenever I was younger, but then whenever I get a little older, we're just living around a bunch of white and Asian people for the most part at this point it's the mid 90s. So yeah, mid 90s. So yeah, so I mean like differences. Differences. And you want to talk about me trying to square myself away with the rest of the world? It was different. I mean, I was getting very much so mixed messages on many different accounts because I'm going home and so my grandmother's not Yeah, my grandmother's kind of racist. Yeah, she's kind of racist. I mean, like, I've softened her up and things like that because I was going to school and I was very much so raised with a very liberal PC sort of message, and so I was a political correct pundit in my house, man. Like, so my grandmother used to call it Asian people Oriental, and I was very clear, Grandma, that's a rug. You cannot call them that. And things like that. As a kid, I mean, like, yeah, that was me. Yeah, very little. That's why when people talk to me about certain things now, a lot of times when people have ideas, they do not realize I've already had those ideas. I just had those ideas much younger than you had them, and I guess I outgrew them, I suppose. Like, I'm not saying that from a superiority standpoint or something like that, but that's a lot of the truth with me. It's not like I haven't thought things that other people think, and it's not like I don't understand why other people think things. Part of the reason why I come up with the arguments that I come up with as it pertains to common misconceptions and notions and things like that is because a lot of those ideas are similar ideas I've had myself at an earlier point in time in my life. Though I'm not very old, it's the case that I've always had ideas and I've always thought about things and I've always been insistent on arguing about things and presenting my ideas and things like that in front of people and everything like that, or trying to persuade my grandmother that she shouldn't be so damn prejudiced. That was the deal. And so, yeah, so that was me. So that was me whenever I was younger and everything like that. Now, and so, um, I'm six, and so, a lot of mixed messages going on in my social sphere, but nothing I feel like I really need that has any pressing concern that I need to tackle or deal with or settle right then and there. I remember whenever I was 4 years, 3 or 4. I'm not, so I have to believe it's 4 because we had already moved to our new home, and so in the suburb. And so my grandfather was cutting the backyard. He's cutting the grass, and so after he cut the grass, he would clean up. We had dogs, so he would clean up the dog poop and things like that. To I guess for the so one, we weren't, my sister and I weren't likely to step on it and track it in the house. Similar for himself because he liked to spend time out there working on things. I don't know if he liked it actually. I just know he did it a lot. And two, I think for the aesthetics, he's very strongly disgusted by it. He didn't actually like having dogs. My grandmother is one who wanted dogs and everything like that, and so he complained about the dogs. And so that was one of the things that he complained about, the dog's poop, stuff like that. But he cleaned it up anyways after he cut the grass. And so I noticed his disgust over the dog poop. He winced as he was scooping it up with like a rake and shovel. And I winced too because the smell is like very it's disgusting. At least like to me it was as a kid. Now it's just like I've smelled worse. So it's like whatever. It doesn't disgust me. Like if I see feces now, it doesn't disgust me, but as a kid, it straight up disgusted me. And so, but I noticed we both winced, and so I thought, wow, so he doesn't like dog poop, and I don't like dog poop. Um, and so I thought maybe all people don't like dog poop, and I'm not kidding. I have this little train of thought. So I asked him if we don't like if we don't like dog poop, does that mean dogs don't like our poop? And he looked at me like, what the hell? He just looked at me like, what the hell? And so whatever I was thinking about and philosophizing about at that age was not anything that I'm doing now, but I always had things to contemplate, and that's what I was, a little thinking, contemplating thing. Who liked superheroes? So that was the deal. That was the deal. And I could tell you the definition of cellular regeneration and everything like that. Like I was a nerd. I was such a nerd as a kid. And I was pretty damn artsy fartsy. I mean, I loved music, so I would sing, I would dance. I started dancing whenever I was, I think, 3. I started dancing whenever I was 3 years old because my mother had come over to see my sister and myself, and she had a cassette of Michael Jackson's greatest hits, but in terms of music videos. So there's Thriller, Beat It, Billie Jean, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, PYT, all the things that he had at least music videos to. It's also the cassette I saw Earth Song on, which also inspired me to be a little more ecologically conscious as a kid. Dude, I was so onto the environment. So whenever I was 6, I was a serious hugger. Like, no kidding, no kidding, no kidding, no kidding. Younger me was like everything that people talk about liberals about, like everything that people complain about, what people would consider a liberal or neoliberalism or something like that. That was all of me as a kid. I'm not kidding. Like 100%. Like 100. Though I was a lot more competitive though, like than just those weren't even though those were my ideas, those were like the ideas I had and stuff at that age. And those are the things that I believed and I tried to act out morally and things like that to a certain extent. I was still super competitive as a kid, like super competitive. I did not like losing very much. Though I wasn't a sore loser. I actually dealt with it better than a lot of other kids I found out. But I did not like losing. I distinctly remember I never liked losing. But anyways, so that's me. So that's a little synopsis of me and everything like that. So you can imagine my very much more conservative grandmother, who's rather more militant than I am, finds some of the things that Joshua thinks and believes pretty annoying. But you can swat off like a 6-year-old pretty easily, and so she did that on many occasions or whatever. Just rolled her eyes at me or whatever. Like I'm a kid. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Anyways, and so my grandmother is also very deeply religious. So my grandmother is fundamentalist Baptist Christian. And so I've been going to church, I mean, since I don't remember. So, like, I was born in a church. I might as well have been. Like, I mean, like, by the time I could remember things, I'm gonna put it like that. Church always was. Wherever people have that moment of, I remember when I started doing this. I do not have that when it comes to attending church. I had always been in a church at some point in time in my life since I don't know fucking how old. And so my grandma was very insistent on my sister and myself being Christian. Well, she believed it was the right thing. She was saving our souls, is how she put it. Instruct a child in the way rear a child in the way that they shall go, and when they're in their older age, they will return back to it. That's which comes from Proverbs, which is what she would say all the time. And spare the rod, spoil the child. I know, like many people probably heard that one. That was another favorite one of hers to quote. And so yeah, and so that was my grandmother. And so, I mean, and I heard Christian radio, I watched Christian televangelists. So I've seen Chuck Swindoll. Um, yeah, so my grandmother really liked Chuck Swindoll. She really liked what's that other guy? Charles Stanley. Um, can't remember the third one, but those were the two ones that I remember she watched a lot. And she also listened to them on the radio. So we listened to KHCB. I don't really know what the acronym stands for, but it was a Christian radio station in Houston, and they had many Christian dramatizations on it. So Unshackled, I listened to those. So I should have been asleep, but the radio was always on, and so sometimes I slept in the living room just because I felt like it. Because I slept by the radio. So if I didn't know, so nobody told me I should have done music or anything like that, and I didn't know at that time either. But I was asleep by the radio. One, because I liked the music that was coming out of it, and two, I always found the dramatizations and they had debates and things like that on there too. I can't remember the speakers. I can't remember the guy's name. It's not Ravi Zacharias, but he's older than Ravi Zacharias. Uh, I can't. Anyways, so Christian apologists. So there's like apologetics, all sorts of things. I heard it all. I didn't know what I was listening to necessarily. So I knew to make intelligible sense of it from the standpoint of the Bible, like why they were talking about certain things. Because guess what? My grandmother, once we could read, we were reading. So we were reading the Bible and everything like that. So I read the Bible all the way through by the time I was 12, and that's not because I started like at 12 or 10 or something like that. It's because, well, I don't know when I started reading the Bible. I put it like that. I don't know, but we have always been doing it. That kind of deal. Yeah, so reading is similar. So I don't really. So I remember doing You Can Read, but I don't remember when I first started reading. I don't remember. My grandmother has to tell me when I first started reading. I don't remember when I first started speaking. My grandmother has to tell me. All this stuff is anecdotal because I don't remember. I don't remember. It all happened too goddamn early for me to know anything about any of it. So this is all anecdotes from my grandmother and what I can remember from being 3, 4, and 5. Once my memory goes past 3, not, and it's just bits. It's not everything. So, anyways, so yeah. So I was very, 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 very. I was raised very Christian, like extremely Christian. I was born Christian, if I can phrase it like that. And so, yeah, that was my early childhood. Now, um, I'm 6, and so this is the normative landscape. We're very Christian. My grandma's very militant, also a pretty strict disciplinarian. My sister and I are expected to do chores and clean our room and things like that, but we're pretty well behaved kids and obedient and deferential to our grandmother because like what the hell do we know. And two, I'm extremely like liberal as a little I'm extremely liberal as a kid, and I'm very much so interested in nature, biology, and life. Like that's the deal. And so, 6 years old, my grandmother started going to work because she wanted to start her own business, and so she had won money from compact and a settlement, but I guess they spent a lot of that on the new house and cars, and I don't know what else. It has to be on some of the vacations and things like that. So she used some of that money as well to buy a space in Jersey Village, which was a kind of makeshift flea market that was in our area, and start a sports clothing apparel business. But